We need 2 minutes past 9 a.m. as we continue this morning, and we're going across to Africa now and focusing on the continent. We're talking about South Sudan. We're talking about the violence that could amount to war crimes, unimaginable in each and every way. We're joined on the line this morning by Amnesty's director for Southern Africa, for East and Southern Africa, Deprose Muchena. Deprose, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, let's just talk about South Sudan because for a very, very long time, we've seen this fighting in this country and we've seen the clashes between rival armed groups, the government and opposition forces. And we just see so many people killing. Now, this violence, as described, is unimaginable.
Indeed, that's very true. Between June and October this year, we had local groups that are affiliated to the army on the one end and armed opposition on the other, waging a real campaign of terror upon civilian population of the Balanda and Azanda communities in the Tambura County of West Equatoria. We visited the area to document the violence and the human rights violations that took place in the immediate aftermath of this fighting. And, the violations ranged from gross human rights violations and possible war crimes.
Yes. Now, also, just talking about the Western Equatoria state, and we've learned about thousands upon thousands of people that have actually been forced to flee, leaving this whole trail of death and destruction behind.
Indeed, you had three types of violations that we documented. The first cluster of violations relates to abduction, unlawful killings, and other civilian harm that were deployed in the area, and we had really harrowing stories and accounts of people who were escaping indiscriminate gunfire that lasted for hours in entire neighborhoods being set alight, seeing their relatives or neighbors being shot to death, and fighters slitting throats of victims. And we also recorded cases of stray bullets landing in homes of internally displaced persons. We had a case particularly that was painful of a 10-year-old girl. So that was the one cluster. The second was just looting and destruction, of homes and households. So most of those that we interviewed said that their homes were looted or burned, and crops were left unharvested due to the insecurity of the area. And for people who rely on farming for a living, this has a real devastating impact for livelihood. We also used satellite imagery as part of the analysis, that it illustrated real widespread damage and destruction, between June and October across the county. This destruction also affected schools and medical facilities. In November, out of just 13 of the 20 medical facilities in the county, you really had all these 18 being rendered unusable or being vandalized, and the rest of them that remained being barely functional. You had out of 53 schools in the county, only 18 were open in November. And so this is real burning, destruction, and looting. And the last cluster of violations we looked at was displacement and a humanitarian crisis that is now looming. The fighting displaced more than 80,000 people, and it has now created dire humanitarian crisis because of the violence, the trail of destruction, and the traumatic exposure that left survivors really feeling hopeless, afraid to return, and most of them is thinking that this violence will return to them.
Deprose, in understanding the root cause of the problem, is this about a power struggle? Is this about just ethnic hatred that people have for each other that has created this ethnic violence? Because we know Sudan is rich. It's rich in resources. And for a long time, we've heard about how oil rich the country is, but also at the same time, fertile and the potential of being the breadbasket for Africa.
No, you're right. All the potential, economic potential of South Sudan for the region is well documented. We know that. But the root cause of this fighting, certainly this recent violence in Western Equatoria, it can be traced to the allocation of the state of that state, to the opposition, SPLM in opposition in May 2020. as part of a power-sharing agreement between the parties to the 2018 peace deal. The first Vice President, Riek Machar, then had a subsequent appointment of a governor in the state that angered key figures in the political elite among the Azande community, who then, have historically governed that area, or the Western Equatoria. So that's really the cause. But what we see is the absence of comprehensively dealing with cycles of violence in the past that then breed more potential and fertile ground for violence. Because even in this particular case, the government has not done or deployed any comprehensive investigation into this area or in previous acts of violence. So it rewards others who have power, who have guns, to commit acts of violence as part of settling political disputes.
Also, with the numerous attempts at peace having failed, are there any other options?
The real options, and I think this is precisely why we believe that in addition to the government of South Sudan taking particular measures in our calls that we have made, including reconstruction efforts for this massive destruction I have spoken about, facilitating assistance and provision of essential services to those who have been displaced now, and establish conditions for safe return for those who have been displaced, and also ensuring that those responsible for these war crimes and other violations are held to account. You just have to do that in order to give this country a chance to move forward. But we need the international community to get involved, and we need the United Nations Security Council to ensure that the arms embargo imposed on the territory of South Sudan in 2018 is renewed, because too many communities and people are accessing guns, and it becomes a place where person with the longest rock and stick carries the day. We're back to the Stone Age. We need the African Union Commission and the government to establish the hybrid court for South Sudan, which, as you know, is one of the building blocks under the justice mechanisms to the peace deal that is required in order to give this country the opportunity to deal with the outstanding justice question and accountability.
Yes, Deprose, thank you very much for that update and then insight into what is taking place in South Sudan. We wish you all the best, and we know that today is International Human Rights Day. And when we look at this day, and when one looks at all these human rights abuses that are taking place in that part of the world, really, it is not acceptable. It's just horrific that, the country has been allowed to degenerate to this extent.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for spotlighting this evening.
All the best to you, sir.
Bye-bye.
That was Deprose Muchena, Amnesty's Director for East and Southern Africa, with us this morning, which brings us straight on to 9:30.